Almost 3,000 men were slaughtered, virtually the entire garrison, and many after they had surrendered. Cromwell said, being in the heat of the action, I forbade them to spare any who were under arms in the town. Any priests found were murdered, and the commander of the garrison, Sir Arthur Ashton, was beaten to death with his own wooden leg. Several hundred civilians were killed, but the English and Irish defenders were the main targets of execution.
That is done, as Cromwell himself makes clear, by knocking them on the head. That's to say they're clubbed to death.
He beats their brains out.
He beats their brains out because it saves bullets. You know, you've got a long campaign in front of you. You don't waste bullets.
Here at St. Peter's Church, Cromwell's men set fire to the building. They killed soldiers and civilians alike as they tried to flee the flames. Drogheda was an act of vengeance against English royalists and the Irish, whom Cromwell blamed for the massacre of Protestants. Its military aim was to terrorise other garrisons into abandoning resistance. But a later English politician who would wrestle with the Irish question had no doubt about the nature of Cromwell's legacy. Said Winston Churchill, he cut new gulfs between the nations and creeds. Upon us all still lies the curse of Cromwell. At Wexford, his army committed another massacre, but many garrisons surrendered. Cromwell was back in England by mid-1650, leaving the army under the command of his son-in-law. Guerrilla bands now staged hit-and-run attacks. Cromwell's army responded with ferocity.
The serious loss of life really takes place after Cromwell's departure, much of it induced by the Cromwellian soldiers themselves. They simply destroy the infrastructure of the country. They razed crops, they drove people out of their homes, they burnt down buildings, they deliberately targeted the civilian population in a very systematic way.
The uprooting of populations was a common feature of European war in this period. But what happened next would change Ireland's social order irrevocably. In 1652, Parliament in London passed the Act of Settlement, a radical bill decreeing that the rebel Catholic nobility were to lose their estates and be exiled to the poor regions west of the River Shannon. One of Cromwell's generals came here to the Burren in the west of Ireland, inspected the landscape, and then remarked approvingly, "There is not water enough to drown a man, wood enough to hang one, nor earth enough to bury him." To here and to the fastnesses of Connacht, the Irish nobility were to be banished. In the telling of the Irish story, this is Cromwell's enduring legacy: go to hell or Connacht. But his attitudes were more complex. Does Cromwell deserve his uniquely monstrous reputation here?
No, he's not the most anti-Catholic of Englishmen. He thinks he knows Ireland and he doesn't think it's necessary to be so severe. And so he spends most of the 1650s trying to make the settlement less severe than his successors. By blaming it all on him, you let the English more generally off the hook.
A handful of large landowners survived, but the grand narrative was of dispossession. By the end of the 1650s, only around 15% of land remained in Catholic hands. Galway would become the only remaining county with a Catholic landowning majority. Across the country, a new Protestant ruling class was being installed. But English dreams of a settled Ireland have always been hostage to external events. The country was never the calm laboratory of colonial experiment. Now, dramatic events in Europe and in England itself would reverberate west and drag Ireland to the forefront of conflict once more. This crisis would begin in a Europe dominated by a kingly colossus. Louis XIV, Catholic King of France. He terrified his neighbours with his territorial desires and built monuments to his own glory, like the Great Palace of Versailles. His neighbours, both Catholic and Protestant, found themselves drawn together in shifting military alliances against the expansionism of Louis.
Even by the standards of contemporary monarchy, Louis had a conspicuous sense of his own greatness. Once, when angered by some misfortune, he asked, "Has God forgotten everything I have done for him?" But Louis's power was about to be challenged by a man who would become a hero to the Protestant cause in Europe, and an icon of enduring power to the Protestants of Ireland.
Prince William of Orange, Protestant leader of the Dutch Republic, resisted French attempts to conquer his country.
William is not a dogmatic man, but he does feel that there is a sort of free world, which is predominantly Protestant, which has to be defended. But I think it's important to realize that defending Protestantism doesn't mean fighting Catholicism. It means fighting France.
William is drawn to Ireland by an English crisis. Cromwell is long dead and the monarchy restored. But King James II is a Catholic, and when his son is born in 1688, the nightmare of Protestant England, a Catholic dynasty, is at hand. Haunted by the memory of past persecutions, Protestant noblemen ask William to invade England and re-establish a Protestant monarchy. For William, Protestant England would be a valuable ally in his war with King Louis. Soon after William landed in Devon, James fled to France.
Early in 1689, Parliament offered the Dutch King William the English throne,
which he duly accepted.
But his exiled enemy, King James, was busy conspiring with the French king and preparing to fight back.
Louis XIV understands that if he really wants to hurt William, he needs to destabilize his position on the British Isles. And supporting James is a good way of doing that.
With Louis's help, James raised an army in France and sailed for Ireland. On March the 12th, 1689, he landed here at Kinsale in County Cork.
This Catholic king landed with about 1,200 French troops, but soon thousands of Irishmen were rallying to his flag. They were willing to support an English king because they believed he would grant them religious freedom and return confiscated lands. To the dispossessed, the arrival of James signalled the rebirth of hope.
James marched through Cork and on towards Dublin. By April, his army was besieging Londonderry, one of the last bastions of Protestant resistance. But the defenders closed the city gates and they remained shut until the garrison was relieved after 105 days of siege. Their slogan of "No surrender" would echo through the centuries. This escalating crisis brought William himself to Ireland with a large army. He would face King James here on the banks of the River Boyne on the 12th of July, 1690. This was a battle about European, English and Irish power struggles, and both armies were diverse. Germans, Dutch, Danes, English, French and Irish prepared to fight.
Tell me about the battle.
The Williamite plan was to push a part of their army in the face of the Jacobite army across the river, and at the same time swing another part of the army around behind the Jacobite lines and cut them off from retreat, in a word, to envelop or destroy them. The push across the river was relatively successful. However, the arm of the pincer failed to close on the retreating Franco-Irish army. So most of the Franco-Irish army, the Jacobite army, escaped intact.
Describe for me the scene at the end of the day. What does James do when he sees the battle has turned against him?
James, not to put too fine a point on it, took horse for Dublin. And by fleeing, he implicitly admitted that the Battle of the Boyne was for him, the deciding event. His cowardice is condemned. He's described as Seamus Haka the Collier, James the Shite who lost Ireland.
To William, the Boyne and the battles that followed were important, but only as part of a wider European power struggle. In Ireland, however, his victory ensured the survival of Protestant supremacy. And among the Protestants of Ulster, this Dutch king with his multinational army would be acclaimed as a saviour, and his victory at the Boyne commemorated each July.
How do you think William would have viewed Orange marches, Orange triumphalism, the kind of thing that we've seen historically in Ireland?
I think he would have been uncomfortable with it. William loathed public festivities. He didn't like marches in the first place. The moment he entered London in 1689, when the English people were cheering him, they were actually carrying sticks with oranges. He thought it was nonsensical. He took a detour, avoided the crowds.
To the vanquished Irish Catholics, William offered generous terms, but his successors ignored the promises.
By the end of the Williamite Wars, the Catholic elite in Ireland had either been wiped out, driven into exile, or abandoned any resistance. The people who'd led the great rebellions against Elizabeth, against Cromwell, had been thoroughly defeated. And in their place came a new ruling ascendancy.
The Irish ascendancy means the privileged Irish. We're talking about, from the late 17th through the 18th century, privilege is, as in every European ancien regime, privilege is associated with religious profession. To be a member of the ascendancy, to be privileged, you're Protestant.
But unlike the rest of Europe, in Ireland, the state religion was that of the minority. Throughout the 18th century, this Protestant ascendancy monopolised power and wealth. Its grandees emerged from a range of backgrounds, from nouveau riche and nobility. There was a surge in construction of grand public and private buildings. There were new road networks and canals. Ireland offered opportunity for men of the right faith.
To be a member of the ascendancy does not mean that you're only, let's say, the descendants of Cromwellian expropriators. It can mean that you're from a Catholic family who has cleverly converted at the right time.
In this country of men on the make, the story of William Connolly offers a striking parable of the possible in ascendancy Ireland. This is Castletown House, and it was built by Connolly in 1722 at the height of his fame. He was one of the most powerful political figures of his day, and he was the son of a family that had converted to the Protestant faith.
William Connolly was the Speaker of the Irish House of Commons for nearly 15 years, and on his death he owned 100,000 acres of land with an annual income of £17,000. He was born an innkeeper's son.
A house like this would have cost an absolute fortune at the time. Where did Connolly get his money?
He got it in wheeling and dealing in land speculation in the area around Derry, where he took a lot of the land which had been confiscated during the Williamite Wars from Catholics.
With something as grand as this, what is Connolly saying to the rest of Ascendancy Ireland?
To keep political power, he needed a place where people could come and be received. So this was set up really as a second court outside Dublin.
So Connolly's preening here at one level, but he's also very cleverly looking after his cronies, making sure that what he wants politically happens.
He is, but it's not very dissimilar from what might happen today. You bring all the people you want to influence together in one room, you give them lots of wine, you give them lots of food, and then you decorate it with examples of your good taste. Connolly's political associates would have been brought down here to be entertained and to view this house and to understand just how civilised a person Connolly was.
The masters of the ascendancy would help to make Dublin a city of the Enlightenment. The great statesman Edmund Burke learned the art of oratory